Okay. So, in terms of study recruitment, there's a set of recruitment schemes that we have used in the past, which offer some advantages, and I thought that I'd quickly highlight here a number of those schemes so that we could get a sense of some of their trade-offs, and talk about their use. So when trying to bring in individuals to a study, we've done everything from posters, flyers around communities, or postcards sent to homes, to social media using Facebook. This is something Mohammed knows a lot more about than I, but which was used to reach people in one of our studies. We posted some to community sites, certainly for campus recruiting. The PAUSE site here at the U of S has been a tried and true mechanism. In one study, community organizers had a role in terms of contact with the community, explored interest within their community in terms of opt-in. And in other cases, institutional networks within an institution, word of mouth, people talking or announcing a seminar on this topic, what people could come to. Those were all mechanisms that we explored. And I don't know that there's too much deep insights I can give here aside from sort of fairly obvious characterizations. One thing is that Facebook mechanisms can be set to target particular subgroups or particular people with particular groups of interest. And Mohammed, do you want to talk about that just a bit, say a few words?
Well, if the study design limits the use of one platform versus the other, like for example, we are using features that's only available on Android and not iPhone, like for example, monitoring browsing history is not possible on iPhone. So if we decide to have that stream, and because of that you have to go with Android only, we can limit that. We can say only show this message to people who use Facebook on Android or iPhone, whichever we choose.
Yeah.
We can choose range. We can choose age range. So we can choose age range. We can choose interests. There are some limitations that Facebook has in terms of how you target your advertisements, because they don't want it to be to look race dependent.
Yeah.
But I think you can address based on ethnicity as well. So they have a set of criteria that you can choose, which I think helps a lot to target specific. Like you can choose based on gender.
Yeah. Yeah, I see.
So that already limits the people who see that advertisement.
I see. Yeah. So if we were recruiting women with gestational diabetes, or who are planning to start a family in coming years, that could be very useful, both age and gender, for example. Yeah. And the costs associated with those?
It's
Are those independent of targeting, or do those?
They use a specific mechanism for cost, as they call it bidding. So they say for that category that you have defined, how many other people also want to show advertisements to those people.
Yeah.
So if you pick a very popular category that other people also try to get hold of, so you have to bid more. That's why there's no specific pricing. It ranges anything $50 and above, like $20,000
per what?
Per bid. Now
per bid.
Well, not $50 per bid, but you say I put $50, and then Facebook bids on your behalf, and then depending on how popular is that category, you might get shown 50 times or 25 times or 100 times.
I see.
how much that $50 shows your advertisement is something that you will know after the fact.
How many
and
eyeballs
you can just
you
say
get,
whether
yeah.
you want, how many eyeballs you get, and you can choose to go to invest more and to go more, or you can choose to just stop it.
Okay. Okay. So that's good. Clearly, for certain types of study needs, that might be of interest for young people, for example, and actually for a large segment of the population. For other groups, you know, for individuals who are homeless, for example, there might be obviously very different sort of needs. For example, posters at shelters, for example. Yes.
Do you have a sense of which of these result in, you know, greater or lesser participation rates, you know, in terms of recruitment?
Right.
I'm also thinking about, you know, standard, source populations through government sources. You know, you're talking about gestational diabetes,
Yeah.
So accessing lists of all new mothers, or
Yeah.
you know, electoral rolls, those sorts of things.
Right. Right.
The sort of buy-in or the sort of responses you've had from government in you know, using these kinds of approaches.
Yeah. It's interesting because when we have worked with governmental partners, I don't think we've leveraged, to the best of my memory, I don't think we've leveraged their databases at all. However,
in one of the works we are going to do, so in the tomorrow cohort.
Oh yes, good point. That's a very good point. Surveillance cohort, yeah, that's a good point. So sort of running at a top of a already recruited health surveillance cohort. Success there. I would say that none of these stand out as being particularly weak, or for that matter, strong. I guess the one proviso I'd say for that is we did have unfavorable experience, and actually a fair bit of graphical design went into it and so on, and it's not clear that those yielded anything close to what would have been worth the costs involved. Is that fair to say, Mohammed?
Yeah, we used a few very unconventional methods in some of the studies. One was the mailing postcards. The other one was using the yard line signs that they put. The other one was having a radio ad, which is not as common, and newspaper ad as well. And when newspaper ad, the problem is we couldn't measure how influential was that, but those are costly. But in terms of which one is more effective, actually, like I think it highly depends on the study settings. Like for some of them, like they wanted to, like for some of the studies, they wanted to that they had a discussion with group in Maryland. They wanted to recruit everyone from the dorm, so they had already dorm in place. Obviously, they just recruited everyone there.
Yeah.
Now, in another one view in Philadelphia, they wanted to recruit from a specific, from the visitors to a specific hospital. Yeah. So they just put a booth there, and only everyone who was going there, they were recruiting. Now, for those who are trying to target general public, some of these ones apply, like flyers, social media, and community sites. And the two other studies that we had that we discussed yesterday, that those are particularly faced a lot of challenges because generally running studies with public is more challenging than with targeted group. Those ones, the one in Alberta had a better experience with Facebook. We suggested Facebook to the group in Boston as well. They used Facebook and Craigslist. They had a lot better experience with Craigslist. And that's why they actually right now, they always have an ad like every 2 days they refresh their ad. And they got very good response back. Apparently people do check sites like Craigslist or Kijiji to see if there is any study they can join.
As you say, it's highly dependent on the study setting, the participants. You know,
exactly.
So you know, we tried to recruit new mothers into a birth cohort study recently, and after consulting with the stakeholders and the nurses, and we sort of got the least intrusive recruitment method down, which involved sending out letters as they've left hospital and gone home. And when you think about it, that's probably the worst time to try and recruit a new mother into a study, right?
Yeah.
So the response rate was embarrassing. It was like less than 10%.
Right.
Whereas we go and do a survey with women who are engaged in the breast screening program.
Yeah.
And it's their service, and but they want to help to make sure that it works the best, and so on. And you go and
right.
We recruit. You go recruit women from there through a month, and you'll get I think we get 12,000, 13,000 women in a month.
Wow.
And a response rate of 70%, because they can see that they're engaged and so on. So so the traditional recruitment methods don't work anymore anyway. But so that's why I was interested to see which of these might be kind of able to dovetail or augment those traditional methods. Yeah.
Right. I think there's a lot of learning to go on here as a field, and I actually think that someone with your background could contribute a lot to this discussion. I think there's big avenues to be explored here, and particularly in this kind of emerging world where the newspaper ads and radio retreat, and you have other types of media, other types of recruitment schemes coming to the fore. I stand remiss for not having mentioned this other strategy where one participant begets another, where you have respondent-driven sampling or snowball sampling, and then the variety of respondent-driven sampling to try to make that somewhat more representative or to achieve certain diversity goals. Here, your participants recommending other participants, right? And there's some ethics challenges associated with that, because there's natural sensitivities that if a participant mentions the name of another potential participant, that's been done without the consent of that other potential participant, and they may feel violated because of it. And there's ways of dealing that with you give out cards, or you give out some sort of designation, and to indicate who the ego is, and then that person sends it out, and an interested party opts into responding with the card or with the invitation or what have you. But this is also a viable method when it's really constrained demographically or technology-wise. That can be quite slow. But where there's less concerns here, it may be that this would be a pretty good method. It's just you've got to keep it representative. Okay. Okay. Hold on. Hello? Hi. Yeah, I'm teaching. Oh. Okay. Didn't mean to hang up. Okay. Okay. So in any case, we're going to have to learn a lot, I think, in coming years about this. Mohammed, are there any additional features about these ones at the top you want to add to this?
I think you covered almost all of them.
Okay.
I was going to ask about social networks and measuring and enumerating social networks, but maybe we're going to talk about that in the context of respondent-driven sampling and snowballing and so on. Maybe we're going to talk about that later on.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I had that in mind for some discussion, but I do think recruiting networks is a notable component of study design when one is interested in social effects, right? If you're interested in understanding the effects of individuals in affecting activity, of people in your network, or people in close proximity and affecting your behavior or your ideation. Recruiting networks is central, and so we've used the snowball sampling or respondent-driven sampling in this area, and I think it can be helpful. Mohammed can talk quite a bit and I think I have a slide or two on this elsewhere, so maybe we could come back to it. But this, it can be challenging in terms of you often want to record the network structure that by which they were recruited, and potentially to undertake actions based on the network structure, such as keeping track of who corresponds to who with Bluetooth identifiers versus the self-reported networks. And then you also may want to trigger things based on the presence of people in your specific network as detected via Bluetooth. And Mohammed has done some heavy lifting in that front that has been laudable, but he can speak about the challenges associated with that.
There are two ways that I've seen is being done in the study design. One is you pick a sample population, and then you monitor their interaction based on, for example, Bluetooth that we discussed yesterday, and then you try to find the networks.
In terms of proximity.
Yeah, and then
whether
based
met
on
or not
whether they have met or not, and then based on that data, you can find you can detect the networks. You can say, well, this group of people are usually hang out, this group of people usually hang out. That's one way. That's a simpler way. The second way is that you find the networks prior to their recruitment, and you explicitly recruit those networks as a group of participants. That's a lot more challenging, because first you have to find the participant and then ask them to introduce their network, and then try to recruit those as well. Or, well, the ethics side is one thing, whether they should recruit it or you should recruit them, or how this should work out. But then the other thing is that, assuming that you're successful to recruit all the people who form that network, then you also have to make sure that the compliance of one of these individuals doesn't affect the data collection from the others. Because depending on what sort of data you plan to collect, if the data collection somehow requires both of these people to be compliant, if one of them is not compliant and the other one is, you lose data from both people.
Yeah.
And this is actually one thing that we are dealing as we speak, that we have something around 12 groups that we have detected. And each of these groups, I think 50% of them, one of the team members don't comply as we expect. There are elements of their data collection that is not based on what we instructed. Either their phone has some issues, or they don't respond to the surveys as we expected, or they don't carry their Bluetooth device with them, and so on. And this affects both them and their team member. So though there's only 25% of people that don't comply, but that doubles, and there's 50% of people that we don't get data from.
Yeah.
So
yeah, one wonders if one could have some peer pressure from within the network to in the sense that they're dragging down the team. Could you get others in the team to nudge them or something?
Yeah, but then you have to have incentives for the other person to basically nudge them, because they should have the mindset that, oh, if you don't comply, I lose my.
Exactly.
So then the incentive design should be designed in a way that they get pressure from their from the teammate.
Okay. I agree with that. Okay. So a few other things here. We've been recently exploring a lot. We've not yet used it, but I know other researchers have used it a lot. This thing called Mechanical Turk. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but basically it's a service run by Amazon, which has a user base of somewhere in the thousands, tens of thousands. I think it's around 40,000 these days, maybe 50,000 in the States, if I'm not mistaken. But it has some worldwide elements. Many in the States or in India. But you can actually recruit individuals from that to undertake certain tasks, and that's a potential avenue in the shorter term. As I mentioned, the way we're going is towards a situation involving an installed base of Ethica users who might be in existing studies, who could then be notified, probably through the Ethica app, of new studies that they might be interested in, for which they're qualified. They could be pre-qualified before they're even shown the notification based on their baseline characteristics, age, gender, etc. And then they might go through some further eligibility questions. But the point is that it would be delivered on device to someone who already has the phone, and it eliminates that barrier to downloading, etc. So we found a number of barriers to recruitment, and these are some of them. One is lack of appropriate technologies, and this often goes along with low SES status. In the past, it was often lack of access to phones, but these days that's retreated as an issue. Now what we often see is more lack of access to high capacity phones. We talked about that yesterday, but phones that have requisite space to install something like Facebook to monitor communicational behavior in the form of browsing. Secondly, and that can get in the way for recruiting networks for low SES populations. For complex designs, complex survey designs, there's no question that time-consuming setups can be a problem. So we encountered this in one cohort, and Mohammed was present during some of it, where essentially it can take an hour at first to set up participants, and some of them have to leave in the middle of that. They don't have the time to complete it. And so they actually leave in the middle of consenting and installing the app on their phone and supporting things like Firefox. And it becomes a time barrier. And particularly if you're dealing with study personnel who are not that familiar with Android, for example, or iPhone, if they're working with iPhone, this could be an issue. Lack of interest and incentive, perceived burden. I'm going to have to answer these questions up to 10 times a day or what have you. That could be perceived as a burden. We're not sure, but there's some reasons to think that trust may be an issue for some of the studies, particularly for low SES linkage. One of the fascinating things we've noticed that for individuals who are poor, they're the only cases I have seen of heavy use of snoozing functionality in the phone to stop data collection have been among low SES participants. Okay, and we have also received feedback at time of recruitment to the effect of sensitivities in this area, and the fact that, for example, other family members, such as a husband, is not comfortable with them opting into the study because of concerns about privacy. Now, you can read that one of two ways. It may be that higher SES people just don't opt in. They don't feel the incentives are worth it, and they simply don't opt in. And the ones who actually opt in and pause tend to be low SES because they simultaneously get incentives, but they don't want their data recorded. Or you can take it that perhaps in that population there's a greater sense of vulnerability. But in any case, I'll just note that in the SES populations, and this was kind of pre-Ethica, but it's in some of our other studies, we noted some issues. Lack of awareness of the study, cost barriers. This is for the team recruiting, not for the participants. This got in the way with the need to purchase wearables. So, for example, the Ethica smartwatch that we're using right now, that's quite an expensive watch to record heart rate variability and record electrodermal activity. And once you start handing out additional wearables or additional components, or you start handing out data plans for low SES participants to get the data very quickly, not needed. You could use Wi-Fi only, but if you really want to get the data quickly for some reasons for your studies, handing out data plans is very expensive. And then finally, community buy-in and support. You want a sort of goodwill in terms of efforts towards this. Recruitment of networks. The advantage here, to recruit networks, you can capture dense social interactions, to recognize social influence, recognize clustering across networks, to focus on intervention regimes that may intervene on networks or that focus on changing network structure, right? So this probably goes along with merging or changing networks as well. Disadvantages here include complexity and constraints, and Mohammed talked about them. This issue of opt-out, for example, if one person in the network opts out, does that invalidate other people who are in that network? There are these ethical considerations, not referring people by name, but using these indirect mechanisms for ethical protection. There are these added constraints on recruitment when you need to only recruit people of certain types of phones or phones that have at least this amount of space free in low SES populations. And this is complexity about recording the networks and using them to trigger actions or what have you. So Mohammed, I think have you had to hard code the network structure when you've done this in the past? Or is that something that
we have to define the network as they are recruited. When the last person has joined, there is an area in the site that you go and say this person and this person and this person are part of team 1, this person are part of team 2, and so on. Right. And that is used for the survey triggering, because when the survey is supposed to be released, when two participants meet, it checks their teammates, team ID, and if they're in the same team, then or any other attributes you want to assign to that. Actually, that part's pretty flexible. You can assign for any attribute, like for example, this person is a nurse, this person is a patient, and then if a nurse meets a patient, then you can trigger a survey, or if a patient meets a patient, you can trigger a different survey.
Right. So a smoker meets a non-smoker.
A smoker meets a non-smoker, or any other.
Or a smoker
attribute.
meets a smoker. You could trigger a questionnaire.
That's actually one of the things. Yeah, that's one of the criteria we have defined in the study in Boston, that different sort of questions are triggered if a smoker meets non-smoker versus smoker meets smoker.
Right. Yeah. And then there's the timingless start that also is an issue. So, do you start recruiting with the ego, or do you wait till all their alters? So the ego is the person who refers to others, and if you have a sort of egocentric network, so you have ego and then they have a set of alters that they have referred that are in a different category, to what degree do you start their data recording for the ego at early on, and then and then bring alters in as they come in? Or to what degree do you start data recording only once all of them are recruited? This was a question that we went through, and how do you handle opt-out? So recruitment labor requirements vary widely. I think certainly the lowest burden for the team, for the research team, is if you have remote eligibility checks, automatic download and installs, remote consent via video. It's pretty painless for the team that does this. If you can get the numbers, you're talking about a situation that's very flexible and very minimal effort, but where you're at one step removed, so you don't really know if there's barriers to the numbers here. You don't really know why. You're not in direct contact with people. You're not able to talk with them about opt-out. Whereas the higher burden, the in-person recruitment, there's no question it has high burden, but it has some advantages. You can address concerns that come up with. You can provide materials to recruit friends in person. You can go through complex consent forms and walk them through it. You can elicit additional information like eligibility based on network contacts. You can walk them through the system function. You can download in holding their hands downloaded Firefox and put it on if you want to monitor browsing behavior. You can provide incentives in person like gift cards, and provide some supporting elements like phones if they're in a situation where they're from a low SES group and you want to support them with some phones or smart watches. So there's no question there's some of each of these, some advantages to each of these, the sort of in-person and remote recruitment. We're increasingly trying to do more and more remote recruitment, including via this this mechanism here, as we move closer to it. But this in-person one is going to remain an important one for certain types of studies. So, important recommendation: start small, learn from it, reach out to a small number of participants at first, test out the strategy, and this will allow for early identification of issues, training the recruiting team, building the capacity to handle larger numbers. It's easier to change course if there's aspects of the study design that aren't going to fly or that are at risk. And doing this pilot and feasibility study is highly advised, not least because the IRB or the Research Ethics Board can accommodate changes. Remote consent has some special issues. It's hard to check someone's age to verify that they're paying attention or to address questions in person. You can provide both video and written support for this, so having a video and then some written information. And you might want to use eligibility survey to gate this, to make sure someone has actually watched the video. You provide a code at the end of the video that they have to enter or something like that to ensure that they've actually gone through all of the video. Or you answer surveys on the eligibility survey, you answer the questions to test their understanding. So they really have informed consent. They really know what they're getting into. That's something which could be done. With minors, there's well-defined ethics guidelines that have been developed to protect minors. There's certainly a need to secure informed consent from guardians of patients, and then assent for older children, who are not infants or what have you, that at least are verbal and have some understanding. But you have to provide accessible explanations for what's going on, age accessible to them. There are concerns that have been brought up to us in past years about online behavior, that by giving them a phone or enabling them with a phone, you may be changing their health behaviors by exposing them to online content. These days, that's less of an issue. That was more of an issue 5 years back. And screen time, you're adding one more app to the repertoire, although it's pretty minimal in terms of screen time in most cases. You need to make it attractive to them, and durability is absolutely needed. You need something that's not destroyed. So the work that Amin is doing, I learned about jewelry, which is, with young kids, you want to provide a way they can chew on things without destroying the device, needing to decorate it. So they're planning to decorate it in little ways. So it's a Batman watch, and so the kid wants to opt in, or you put a big diamond on it or something like that. I don't mean a real diamond, but an image of a diamond, and so it looks attractive for a smartwatch or what have you. I think maybe we'll stop now, because I really want to take the time to go after the break through the survey interface, so that right after lunch we can get into diving into defining surveys for your studies. Okay, so yeah.
Can I ask one question about the ethics? I mean, what are the most common sort of objections that the ethics committees come up with, and I guess the strategies that you employ to bulletproof your proposals? I mean, because presumably you've learned. You've cumulatively learned the words to use and not to use when dealing with these guys. So I mean, what's the sort of most common objections? Presumably it's around trust and privacy and those sorts of questions. Is that right?
Well, so we have a later module on ethics where we'll talk some about this. I think a lot of the concerns have to do with confidentiality. For example, one of the biggest objections was giving out a name. In snowball sampling or respondent-driven sampling, having the ego give out the name or contact information of someone does not fly. You need them to give out, do it in a way that person's personal information is not exposed to the research team. That person needs to contact us. Yep. Another information is recording clearly identifiable information, such as names of Bluetooth devices. We encountered this 6 years ago. It was one of the first things we did with Ethica system, with the IEPI system, the lab IEPI system. There was a concern that the Bluetooth names of devices were being recorded. So it would say Dave's phone, for example. And we threw that information out based on Ethic Review Board feedback. We just reliably threw that information out. Even though it could in principle be something that could lead to insights, we just said we're not going to collect this. Another issue is once you get to geospatial information, identifiability of homes and where people spend time, that's another concern, and things can be done there in terms of scrambling or what have you. We haven't had that much objection recently. It's been a balance of risks and benefits, and if you can argue the geospatial side is important for matching up with resources, they don't seem to object much.
And is opt-in as well, presumably, because you can make that opt-in for the participants.
That's exactly right. And so we've used tiered systems for some of our studies where people can opt in to greater and greater levels of use, to the point of allowing, individual level data to be released publicly as part of publications, all the way down to only my aggregate data can be used. Yeah. And those are different levels of opt-in that made our ethics board extremely happy. We haven't used that across the board. That's only been for one study that I think we've gone that extra mile. But by and large, we've had a very good relationship with our board. We have had, in partnerships with other organizations, we found a variety of outcomes. And for what I understand from colleagues in the States, things are all over the map right now, with some ethics boards being very, very casual about it, and some ethics board being very real sticklers, to the point where one university won't allow devices. Yeah. Whereas in another case, we found that it depended hugely on the ethics officers involved. And some ethics officers were quite low-key and very comfortable with what we've done, and others were just trying to find any hole in it or any issues. And one thing that I will say there, and we'll come back to it later, but one thing I will say is, if you can have one ethics board sort of consult with another that has a long experience in this, that can be really effective. And that's what we have done with our ethics board, and I think that's very advised, because our ethics board has known the ropes of this for 7 years, more than 7 years now. We started consulting with almost 8 years ago, well, 7.5 years ago, before we built our very first system. And so they're just very familiar with the ins and outs of it, and that doesn't mean they're not sticklers sometimes. It just means they keep things in perspective and they know where it's really an issue, where it's not. Whereas if you come to an ethics officer who's never dealt with this before, everything is new and they don't know what to pay attention to, what's not, what not to, where it's low risk, where it tends to be higher risk, etc.
So I imagine this is new terrain for the ethics committees, for lots of ethics.
For lots of ethics committees, that's right.
And thinking of the Australian context, there's apart from some mobile phone, sort of fairly static use of mobile phone, in terms of pushing out a survey or whatever. I mean,
a message,
or a message. It's fairly, this is totally, novel, and I think a lot of ethics committees would go into paroxysms over, when presented with these sorts of things. That's really good advice. I mean, presumably we could perhaps use, provide international consultation with your.
Oh, totally. And I
talk to these guys.
I could not speak more highly of our ethics review board here, both in terms of the faculty on it and in terms of the the staff who are really diligent, really thoughtful, willing to dialogue, very knowledgeable, and very serious about really getting down to the issues and not just look at it on the surface, and having that back and forth. So I think they'd be quite open to. I know other institutions have reached out to us, and that's a real asset, and I'd raise the possibility. So yeah, okay. I